Hi class, in this video I'm going to talk about the physiology of the digestive system. If you haven't already, please make sure that you go and watch the anatomy video where I went through the pictures in the PowerPoint. Since I can't really draw out the digestive system very well, I just wanted to go over the anatomy first. Okay, so please watch that before watching this video. Okay, so in that video I already went over the organs, so the main organs and the accessory organs of the digestive system and the differences between those. So the functions of the digestive system, these are like the main overarching functions, are of course to take in food, okay, to break food down into nutrients, and then from that mostly happens in the small intestine. From the small intestine, that food is then absorbed into the bloodstream, okay, and sent to the liver for processing, okay, and then up to the heart for the rest of the blood system. And the digestive system rids the body of anything that's undigestible or things that we don't want in the body. Okay, so we went through the alimentary canal and the accessory organs in the other video, so I'm just gonna skip through that. Okay, so now let's talk about the anatomical terms for those functions that I just went over. So the first one, taking in food, is known as ingestion. Okay, so anything you take into the mouth is ingestion. Okay, so within the mouth we have both chemical and mechanical breakdown. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but in a little bit when we get to the mouth. But mechanical breakdown is going to be with our teeth chewing up the food, and then the tongue as well helps to get the food into a ball, and it helps to push it to the back of the throat for swallowing. Okay, so ingestion, that's taking food in. Okay, we talked about mechanical breakdown. Okay, propulsion we talked about, so that is sending food down through the alimentary canal, so like from the esophagus to the stomach, for example, also from the stomach to the small intestine and all the way down to the anus. Okay, digestion is breakdown of food. So this happens a little bit in the mouth, but mostly in the stomach. Okay, in the stomach we have hydrochloric acid and pepsin, which help to break down our food into a liquid known as chyme, C-H-Y-M-E, chyme. Okay, and then absorption, that happens in the small intestine, a little bit in the large intestine. Large intestine mainly absorbs some vitamins and a lot of water, right? And it makes our waste solid. Okay, so absorption mostly in the small intestine, and then defecation is releasing that waste. Okay, so that happens at the level of the anus. Okay, so relation of the digestive organs to the peritoneum. Okay, so we have the peritoneum, that's going to be the serous membranes of the abdominal cavity. And just like other peritoneums we've talked about, there's a visceral peritoneum, so that would be connected to the organs in the digestive system. Okay, so visceral. And then we have the parietal peritoneum. So that lines the body's wall. And then in between you would have serous fluid, just like with all of the other serous membranes that we've talked about. Okay, so to decrease on friction. Okay, so the cavity is in the digestive system, it's known as the peritoneal cavity since it's the peritoneum lining. Okay, so peritoneal cavity. So there's fluid in there for lubrication for the organs that move, okay, and to reduce on friction. Mesentery, this is another double-layered peritoneum, but the layers are back to back, okay? So it extends from the body wall to the digestive organs, okay? So we talked about the mesentery of the small intestine, right? And it helps to anchor the small intestine to the abdominal wall, okay? It also is where blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves are going to pass through. So when we talked about the lymphatic system, you saw the intestinal or mesenteric lymph nodes, and those were in the mesentery on that model, okay? So you can see a picture of the mesentery on the PowerPoint as well. Okay. So we have peritoneal organs. These are the ones located within the peritoneum, and retroperitoneal. So those ones are posterior to the peritoneum. Okay. So for the digestive system, this includes the pancreas. It's behind, kind of like underneath behind the stomach. The duodenum, so the first part of the small intestine, and the large intestine. Okay, so those are all retroperitoneal. Not part of the digestive system, but the kidneys are also retroperitoneal because they're in the very lower back and they're kind of behind. Okay, so I went through the histology a little bit. Let's go into a little bit more detail here. Okay, so of the alimentary canal, so those are everywhere where food passes through, right? That doesn't include the accessory organs. First we have the mucosa. So this is the mucosal layer. This is on the inside, so this would be on the side of the lumen of the alimentary canal. Okay, so mucosa, this is the first one. So this lines the lumen, so it helps to secrete mucus, okay, which keeps things kind of moving along and would also trap microbes, just like in the respiratory system, okay? And it helps to absorb the product of digestion within the alimentary canal, okay? Now the mucosa has 3 sublayers, so let's do that in a different color here so you don't get confused, okay? So it has the epithelium, okay, and this is a simple columnar epithelia, okay, and that has the mucus secreting cells, okay. So it's usually simple columnar, but in the mouth, esophagus, and anus, it's made up of stratified squamous epithelia. Okay. It can also secrete enzymes and hormones. Okay, so this would happen in the stomach and small intestine. Then we have the lamina propria. Lamina propria. Okay. So this is made up of loose areolar connective tissue, and there are capillaries here. Okay, so this is helpful for absorption. Okay, and you would also have the malt tissue there from the lymphatic system. Okay, and then you have the muscularis mucosa. Okay, so this is smooth muscle that helps to move the mucosa specifically. But then we also have a larger muscularis layer, which we'll get to. Okay, so this is not the large muscularis layer that has the circular and longitudinal muscle layers. Okay, so after the mucosa, so this one is at the lumen, so this is our first layer. Our second layer here would be the submucosa. So sub means under, so this is under the mucosal layer. So this is areolar connective tissue, and you would have blood and lymphatic vessels, lymph follicles, and nerve supply. Okay. Then we have the muscularis externa. So this is that muscle layer. Muscularis externa. Okay, so this one is responsible for that segmentation and peristalsis I talked about in the anatomy video. Okay, so inner circular layer and outer longitudinal layer, and then in the stomach we have that third layer, which is the oblique layer. Okay, so don't forget that. And then in some areas, the circular layer is going to be a lot thicker where we have sphincters. So remember I showed you the lower esophageal sphincter leading into the stomach and the pyloric sphincter leading out of the stomach. That would be circular muscle tissue that's just thicker in that one area. Okay, and then the fourth layer here we have the serosa. Okay, so that's made up of the visceral part of the peritoneum. Okay, in the esophagus, which we talked about a little bit in the anatomy video, it's known as adventitia. So it's made up of, in the esophagus, dense connective tissue, and it holds the esophagus to the structures surrounding it. Okay. The visceral peritoneum is made up of areolar connective tissue covered by squamous epithelia. Okay, so that's in all the other organs. Okay, and the organs that are retroperitoneal, like we talked about the pancreas, they have both an adventitia and a serosa layer. Okay, so they have both. Okay, so now in our alimentary canal, we start with the mouth. Okay, so again, this is where food is chewed up and it's mixed with saliva, okay, which helps to start the chemical digestion of food. Okay, so associated organs of the mouth, we have the tongue, salivary glands, and the teeth. Okay, and inside the mouth is referred to as the oral cavity. Okay. So the walls of the mouth, like the insides of the cheek, are made up of stratified squamous epithelia, and that's to help protect them from abrasion, right? If you eat like hard foods like chips and things, right? There's a lot of abrasion going on when we're chewing our food. So we need lots of layers of epithelial cells. Okay. So we went through the anatomy. So let's talk about the palate, because there's some things that I didn't go over for the palate here. So we talked about the hard palate formed by the palatine and palatine process bones, right? And then the soft palate is mostly skeletal muscle, so there's no bone above it. That's why it's called the soft palate, okay? So this closes off the nasopharynx when we swallow so that food doesn't go up and out through the nose, okay? So that would happen from the uvula. So the uvula, when we swallow, kind of comes up and protects that nasopharynx area, okay? And then the area, so laterally, the soft palate is anchored to the tongue by the palatoglossal arches. And in between the arches, so the arches are the palatoglossal arches. So the tongue, we have like the uvula here, and then these arches, okay? So these are the palatoglossal arches, and then the space between them, so like here and here, are the fauces, okay? And then the uvula is this part that hangs down. So that's the part that comes upward to protect the nasopharynx from food entering into it. Okay, we talked about the salivary gland, so I'm just gonna skip over that. Okay. So saliva, the enzyme that it secretes is known as amylase. Amylase, okay? Remember, anything that ends in ASE is an enzyme, and amylase starts to break down starch, okay? So this is the first area within the mouth, is the first area where chemical digestion begins, okay? Saliva also helps to clean the mouth, dissolve the chemicals in food so that we could taste them on our taste buds. And it also helps to moisten the food and compact it into like a ball known as a bolus. And then the tongue helps push it to the back of the mouth for swallowing. Okay, so salivary glands have serous cells that secrete the enzymes, water, ions, and a little bit of mucin, and the mucus cells that produce mucus. Okay. So the parotid and submandibular glands, they contain mostly serous cells, but the sublingual gland, the one underneath the tongue, has mostly mucus cells, but it does have some serous cells as well. So that's how you can tell the difference between them under the microscope. Okay. The tongue is on the floor of the mouth, and we've already talked about this in some detail. It helps to kind of manipulate the food, move it around, turn it into a bolus, and push it to the back of the mouth. Okay, and we talked about the different types of papillae, so I'm just going to skip over that for now. Okay, so we talked about the 20 baby teeth known as deciduous teeth or milk teeth. Okay, so these erupt between 6 and 24 months of age. Okay, so it can happen a little bit earlier. Some babies start getting them a little bit later. It can vary. Okay. And then there are the permanent teeth underneath. Okay, so they start to enlarge and develop when the roots of the milk teeth are resorbed from below. Okay, and that causes those teeth to loosen and then fall out. So of course we know that those baby teeth fall out between around 6 and 12 years old. Okay. Okay, we went through the tooth structure, so I'm just gonna pass through all of that. Okay, so let's talk about some homeostatic imbalances in regards to teeth. So an impacted tooth is a tooth that stays trapped within the jawbone, so this could cause a lot of pressure and pain, and this commonly happens with the wisdom teeth. Okay, so why this is just kind of like one off, but why we have wisdom teeth is back in the day when our diets were a bit different, cavemen and things, they would eat lots of nuts, and that would grind down their second molars, and then those wisdom teeth would come through and come forward and replace those. Of course, nowadays we have usually dental care, so we don't really need those wisdom teeth, and that's why they're usually taken out, because there's usually not enough space for them, not usually, but sometimes there's not enough space for them, and then they can't come all the way through. Okay, so cavities, these are known as dental caries. So this is where the enamel gets demineralized. Okay, and the dentin can become demineralized as well from bacteria. Okay, so plaque is that film of sugar and bacteria that adheres to the teeth, and then the acid from that bacteria can dissolve those calcium salts, even though they're very hard. Okay, so the only prevention for dental caries is daily flossing and brushing of the teeth. Okay, gingivitis, this is where the plaque calcifies to form a calculus known as tartar. Okay, and this disrupts the seal between the gingivae and the teeth, and gums get infected by bacteria. Okay, if the calculus is removed, gingivitis is fully reversible. Okay, periodontitis. This is if you neglect gingivitis, it can escalate to periodontitis. Okay, so the immune cells will attack the bacterial intruders, but they also end up attacking the body tissues. So this can destroy those periodontal ligaments that hold the teeth in place. Okay, it can also activate osteoclasts, which we know break down bone. Okay, so it could lead to tooth loss. Okay, now I'll talk about the pharynx. And so when we swallow food, it goes through the mouth and then to the oropharynx first, right? So oropharynx and then the laryngopharynx. Okay, and then that epiglottis, when we swallow, covers the glottis, and then food should go down into the esophagus. Okay, so it's just a passageway for food, but also air and fluids. Okay. Okay, esophagus, usually it's collapsed if there's no food through it, so it's considered a flat muscular tube, and it runs from the laryngopharynx down to the stomach. Okay, and this is where propulsion of food happens, so it's that continuous contraction of the muscle down. Okay, so it joins at the stomach at the cardial orifice. Okay, so surrounding that orifice we have the gastroesophageal or cardiac sphincter. So when food is not being swallowed, that orifice is closed because of that sphincter. Okay, the esophagus has all 4 of the alimentary canal layers that I went through here. Okay. And it has an adventitia as well instead of a serosa. Okay, so the outer layer instead of a serosa here would be adventitia if we're talking about the esophagus. Okay, heartburn. So this is caused by the stomach acid regurgitating or coming back up into the esophagus. Okay, so it can be caused by eating too much, extreme obesity, pregnancy. Some people get heartburn during, or running, kind of like shaking things up after you eat. Okay. It can also be caused by a hiatal hernia. So this is where part of the stomach kind of protrudes above the diaphragm, and that causes like a squeezing to squeeze things up through the esophagus. Okay, and if it is ongoing for years, it can lead to esophageal cancer because that stomach acid is causing abnormalities, right? Stomach acid can burn other parts of our body. Okay, so again, pharynx and esophagus are just areas where food passes through to the stomach, okay? So function of both organs is going to be propulsion, so moving food down. And this starts with deglutition. So this is an anatomical term for swallowing, okay? So it has two phases. The buccal phase, let's just go through the two phases. So the buccal phase and the pharyngeal esophageal phase, okay? So first is the buccal phase. So we have an upper esophageal sphincter as well as that lower esophageal sphincter. So in the buccal phase, the upper esophageal sphincter is closed to start, okay? And the tongue just presses against the hard palate and pushes the food bolus into the oropharynx, okay? So the first step, the buccal phase, buccal, remember, means cheeks. So this happens like within the oral cavity, okay? So the first phase is food being pushed to the oropharynx. That's it, okay? Second is the pharyngeal esophageal phase. So there's two steps to this, okay? So the soft palate and the uvula are going to come up and close off the nasopharynx. The larynx is going to rise up, so the epiglottis can block the trachea. And the upper esophageal sphincter relaxes so that food can then start entering into the esophagus. And the third phase is the constricting muscles of the pharynx contract, and that forces food, it just kind of pushes the food down into the esophagus. Okay, and then the upper esophageal sphincter is going to close after food enters. Okay. So pretty straightforward. First, we push food from our tongue to the oropharynx. Then that upper esophageal sphincter opens up, the trachea moves up so that the epiglottis can close the glottis. And then food moves down, and then the pharynx pushes food down into the esophagus, and the upper esophageal sphincter closes. Okay. Okay. Now we're down into the stomach, okay? So the stomach is like a temporary storage tank, okay? And this is where the breakdown of protein starts, okay? So like I mentioned before, the stomach converts that bolus of food into a more like paste-like or liquidy kind, okay? Okay. When it's empty, the stomach mucosae form those folds called rugae. So the stomach can expand when it's filled with food, or it can decrease in size when it's empty of food, and you have those rugae throughout on the inside. Okay. And we went through the different parts in the other video, so I'm going to pass through that so I don't have to draw out the stomach. Okay, so functions of the stomach are to mix our saliva, food, and the gastric juices, so forming chyme. It's also like a holding tank for food before entering into the small intestine. And like I mentioned in the other video, food enters into the small intestine slowly in like little increments, okay? It secretes gastric juice, which contains hydrochloric acid, pepsin, intrinsic factor, and gastric lipase. And it secretes gastrin into the blood. Okay, so those are the four main functions of the stomach. Okay, so it has these regular 4 layers, but like I mentioned earlier, it has that third muscularis layer, the oblique layer. Okay, and so the stomach actually can churn like this to kind of mix the bolus together or chyme together with the stomach acid and other enzymes. Okay. There are also gastric pits within the stomach, which lead to the gastric glands, which secrete gastric juice. Okay, so that's one other different modification of the mucosa layer specifically. Okay, and it's the simple columnar epithelia is composed entirely of mucus cells, and they secrete a 2-layer coat of alkaline mucus, which is basic mucus, and that's to combat the acidity of the stomach so that we don't get ulcers within the stomach. Okay, so the glands, again, they produce the gastric juice. So let's talk about the different cells. So we have these different colors. We have mucous neck cells in the stomach. These are all in the stomach. These secrete an acidic mucus. There's not like an exact function known, but likely it is to help to break down food. Okay, so secrete acidic mucus. Okay, mucous neck cells. Then we have parietal cells, which secrete hydrochloric acid. Parietal hydrochloric acid. Okay, so the pH of hydrochloric acid is around 2, and this helps to denature proteins and activates peptin. Okay. It also helps to break down plant cell walls and helps to kill bacteria. Okay. Parietal cells also secrete intrinsic factor, which is used in the absorption of vitamin B12 when it gets down to the small intestine. So also secretes intrinsic factor. Okay. So absorption of B12 in intestine. I'm going to put S for small intestine. Okay. And this also denatures protein. Okay. Then we have our chief cells, which secrete pepsinogen. Okay, so pepsinogen is activated into pepsin by hydrochloric acid, okay, and pepsin itself. So this is another positive feedback mechanism of the body, okay. And then the chief cells also secrete lipases, which are enzymes that digest lipids. So this here is showing that pepsinogen becomes the activated form pepsin, and this is done by hydrochloric acid, and pepsin continues this process, okay? And lipases break down lipids, right? ACE, that's an enzyme, lipids. Okay. Okay. And then we have the enteroendocrine cells. You do need to know all these cells and what they secrete and their functions. Enteroendocrine cells. Okay, so these here secrete chemical messengers that act as paracrines. Okay, so serotonin, histamine, and somatostatin and gastrin. Okay, so serotonin, histamine, somatostatin, and gastrin. okay? So you don't need to worry too much about the enteroendocrine cells. This is more so like endocrine system, which we don't really talk about when we go through endocrine system. But these 3 cells are important for digestion, okay? Okay, so gastritis, this is inflammation caused by anything that breaches the stomach's mucosal barrier, okay? And peptic or gastric ulcers are caused by any erosion in the stomach wall. So it causes a perforation in the stomach walls, or it can be caused by the bacteria H. pylori. Okay, so if you have stomach issues, usually your doctor will check for H. pylori as one of the first things that could be causing the stomach issue to see if it's an ulcer. Okay, let's stop there for now and I'll make a part 3.